Trek Favorites. What are yours? Welcome to Trek Favorites. I'm Chuck Joyner, and this is the show where you get to hear from my tech friends and my Trek friends about some of their favorite episodes of Star Trek. Any episode, any series, doesn't matter if it's a favorite of theirs. All we want to know is why. This time, I'm happy to welcome Mr. Star Wars himself, David Sparks.
Yeah, I brought Yoda along with me.
Yeah, I'm confused. What are you doing here, David?
Actually, I'm a big fan of Star Trek. I mean, I grew up at a very formative age when Star Wars came out, and that's my kind of thing. You know, I mean, I realized a long time ago I don't have enough time to keep up with everything. I'm on the periphery of Star Trek and Marvel and all those things, but I actually know what's going on in Star Wars. But when I was in law school was when The Next Generation was just hitting syndication, early 90s. And I was in this weird spot in my life. I had a scholarship and I had to stay in the top percentage to keep my scholarship. So for the first couple of years, all I did was study. I mean, I had a very singular life. I was like a law monk. And but the one thing I would do every day is at 7 p.m., I would stop and make my, Marie Callender frozen dinner or my top ramen or whatever and watch Star Trek: The Next Generation. And I didn't start watching it when it was new, so I actually picked it up in syndication. But it started syndicating before it was done with its run. So it was the middle of season 3 when I got caught up and then started watching it weekly. And I have very fond memories of Captain Picard and his team getting me through a hard time in my life.
I don't know that I've ever heard anything about Captain Picard taking anyone to law school, but, hey.
Hey.
So, well, we're going to talk about season 4, episode 2, and the title is Family. And this is the one where Picard has just gotten released by the Borg. He was rescued from the Borg and goes home to Earth to see his brother and his brother's family, and kind of finds himself, I think, is probably a fair way to say it.
Yeah, and that was the story I'd remembered when I picked this one. I entirely forgot this is also the episode where Worf's parents come to meet him on the ship, and to his own chagrin, and also the episode where Wesley gets to see the video that his father recorded for him. So it's just a really well written. I didn't look to see who wrote the episode, but I just watched it again today, and I just couldn't get over how good it was.
Well, in the title Family, you're right. It applies to so many different things. Obviously, our focus right now, or back then when it first came on and now, is Picard recovering from his Borg experience.
Yeah.
But you're right. They follow up with Worf and his family, Wesley and his father, who had been killed, when he was a youth. So it is a very family oriented episode in every sense of the word.
Yeah. But the Picard story really, really did it for me. I remember being really impacted by it the first time I saw it. Now, I don't know that I had watched it again since so many years ago when it first aired, but just seeing him kind of fall apart a little bit, the guy who's always so in control, it reminds you of his humanity and makes you think of your own. I really liked it.
I agree with you, and it's so un-Picard-like that it does show his humanity, but it also, and Patrick Stewart plays it so well, because you don't realize how restrained he is, how tight he is before he. And I guess there are no spoilers here because this is how many years old, but after he sort of has that realization that he has been falling apart, has not been dealing with things. And by the end of the episode, he's back in his uniform. He's sort of got the spring in his step, and he's ready to go back to the Enterprise.
Yeah, I mean, he seriously contemplates leaving. And I mean, and the interesting, I mean, the climactic scene for me was the brother and him. The brother keeps needling him until Picard throws a punch. I mean, which is totally out of character, right? The captain who always has it under control. He doesn't like respond to a fight. Like normally someone punches him first, right? He throws the first punch. He's just had it with his brother, and he gives him a smack. And then these two relatively old guys are rolling around in the mud. The fight scene is not hold up well over time. I'll say that, but they get covered in mud and they start laughing. And then he's so covered in mud, his laugh transitions into tears, and he starts crying and explaining what he's been through. And his brother's advice to him is like, you're going to carry this with you a long time. It's just a question of where you're going to carry it. The brother doesn't magically solve his problem for him, but he does put it in a context that makes it more easy for him to carry. And then we see that. Like I remember when Deep Space Nine started. I mean, the very first episode, Captain Sisko is very upset because Picard is the guy who killed his wife. In essence, and just thinking about it after all these years, I mean, what a terrible thing for Jean-Luc to have to carry that for the rest of his life. That he was the one who, was the architect of that massacre. I forget what was the name of the battle. I didn't go. I'll have to go back now and watch the prior episodes. I think it was like Wolf.
Wolf 35-9.
Yeah, I mean, he was the guy. I was just looking while you were talking. This episode was written by Ron Moore, of course, the guy who wrote Battlestar Galactica, did that whole series, and the guy who's now doing the For All Mankind series for Apple TV. Very smart guy, and this episode is a good one.
Yeah, and it's not too many episodes of Star Trek, any of the series, where I can say I have a favorite moment in that particular episode. But this one, my favorite moment is where he's standing there and his brother's wife's comes in, and he's talking about they're offering him this chairmanship of the undersea project, and he says, I actually found myself considering it.
Yeah,
and I love that because it's just like, okay, the lights just came on about what's been happening to him, and he needs to do something about it.
And everybody is enabling him. Everybody around him is saying, "Yeah, you've done your duty. Come back to Earth." But the brother says, "Oh, the mighty has fallen. My brother is gonna." The brother knows that's he'll never be happy if he does it, and needles him basically into the fight scene, which ultimately realizes where Jean-Luc realizes it's a mistake for him. But it was a really beautiful episode. And then, the two of them traipsing the mud into the house at the end and drinking together and singing. It really made me feel good. I have a big family. Stuff like that, gets me in the feels.
So you've wrestled with your brothers in the mud and then gone and gotten drunk?
I don't have any brothers. But yeah.
You mentioned the kind of the B and C plots, if you will. Worf's reaction to his parents. We're right back again to Worf in his own way being so stoic and so proper for a Klingon.
Yeah.
And then his parents come and they are so human and like all parents are, they just never seem to say quite the right thing in front of their son or daughter. And it was played so well by everyone involved.
Yeah. And the thing about that I didn't catch the first time I watched is that story is actually pretty subtle because the parents are putting on a great face in front of Worf. When they're with Worf, they're, "Hey, this is great. Show us the ship," and blah blah blah. But as soon as either one of them are out of earshot of Worf, they're just completely, grief stricken that they know he's been through this, this dishonor with the Klingon Empire, and they kind of understand it. They don't entirely understand, but they do know that he's hurting, and they don't know what they're supposed to do to help him. And they never, once again, this doesn't really get resolved except they communicate to them that they feel for him and they want to help him and that they have his back, and that's all they can really do for him. I mean, it's interesting in both of those stories. The culmination of the story is not that the family member is going to solve your problem for you, but they're going to at least give you the foundation to stand upon to try and solve it yourself. And I don't know. Once again, I just thought it was a really good story. Yeah. Although the Picard story is the reason I wanted to do this episode, frankly. I really found myself kind of wanting to see that again.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you. And there is that turning point with Worf that he says, "I must bear my dishonor alone."
Yeah.
So very typically Klingon. And there's this hint of humanity, and that you can almost see him realizing that his parents aren't Klingon, but they really do care about him,
Yeah.
and want to provide that support. And so he's trying to I think appease them, but at the same time he ends up helping himself with
Yeah.
that same in that same
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. I feel like we should have done this episode with a box of Kleenex, Chuck.
Well, if those are tear jerkers, then let's get to Wesley and
Yeah.
the recording from his deceased father.
Yeah.
David. It struck me that recording could probably be made by just about any father for any son.
Yeah.
At that particular point, obviously his father did not expect to be dead, but he was trying to capture who he, the father, was
Yeah.
at that point in time. And I'm like you, yeah, it touched me too, because I could see my dad in some ways, assuming the technology had been available, wanting to do that same kind of thing. And I think anybody that is close to their father could probably see their father doing it as well.
Well, to me, that story was very interesting, and maybe another reason why I wanted to do this, because when I first saw that, my dad was very recently deceased. So it was very touching to me at the time, but now it's been 25 years. And now I watched it again. And, after all this time, I felt like I could kind of understand, because now he's a distant memory in a lot of ways. And boy, wouldn't it be nice to have a holodeck where I could get some wisdom from him anytime I wanted. But all that being said, I really feel like the other two stories were better. I mean, the character investment was better in the other two stories. This was just kind of a little bit at the end, and I thought Will Wheaton did a great job with it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was really good. But to me, really, the Picard storyline was the one that still really gets me in this episode.
Oh yeah. Well, I agree. I mean,
Yeah.
especially after the previous two episodes, which were
Yeah.
two-parters, the conclusion of season 3 and the beginning of season 4, you've
Yeah.
been so invested in the, I guess, in the characters, in the tension, and the crisis that's upon them. And then all of a sudden it's all gone. It all goes
Yeah.
away. And now everybody's sort of trying to find their way to lick their wounds and recover.
Yeah.
And, that Picard is obviously the one that had the biggest wounds to lick.
Yeah. Yeah.
One thing, just to go back to the Wesley situation for a second, I was a little surprised at Beverly's hesitancy to let
Yeah.
him
Me
see
too.
it.
It's like, come
It's
on,
not
Mom.
well. It's not like she ever just was. It didn't sound like she was seriously considering not letting him see it, but she was worried. What effect it would have on him,
Yeah.
and I guess she didn't know what was on it either. So maybe that justifies her concern. I don't know.
Yeah. I also feel like that was a little forced, just to allow the other. I think, was it Deanna who says, no, don't you think he needs to hear this? There's things that only he can learn from his father. I thought that was kind of like, that was there to get to that next piece of dialogue in some ways. I don't know.
Yeah, but that's so Deanna Troy.
Yeah.
No.
I didn't really
So
understand at the beginning. She was giving Picard a hard time about going back to his family, saying, boy, that's a strange thing to do. I mean, why wouldn't, but it seems to me like that's a natural thing. I can tell you, if I went through something, I would want to go back to my family. I would want that support. So it was just odd to me that I didn't really understand that part at the beginning when she was giving Picard a little bit of a hard time about going back to his family. But I have very few complaints. I thought this was an excellent episode and well acted just across the board. the guy who played Worf's dad, who kept saying, "I have the specs loaded on at my computer at home." He said line 3 or 4 times, and he just sold it. I mean, it was great, and of course, I like that. Of course, he was raised in Russia. His parents were Russian. You never really knew where he came from, right? Um, Worf, where he grew up. You always, as an American, I was just assumed he grew up in like Kansas or something.
Yeah, and you're right. You know what? Even now, until you said that, I didn't really put that together. That he may not have grown up in the United States. I guess.
Yeah, or
Sorry,
whatever the
folks.
United States is at that point. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, folks. I guess we're showing our bias there, but
Yeah.
that's it's open to interpretation.
And also, there's like a passing line where the mother and the father say, "Yeah, it was a very difficult adolescence." I mean, can you imagine? He only would eat Klingon food, and he was so invested in Klingon culture, surrounded in a place with no Klingons. I mean, it makes you feel for the character. What it must have been like for him growing up in this strange place.
David, I don't know about you, but I remember growing up with certain people, and I'm not even going to say friends because I don't want to pretend to say I knew them that well, but they were so ensconced in a certain culture, if you will.
Yeah.
And you can interpret that any way you want, because I don't want to go any farther, because I don't want to call out anybody, but it wasn't a bad thing. It's just that they clearly had trouble relating to everyone else because they were so over there in
Yeah.
that. And sometimes you wonder how that affected their later life and their later relationships, whether they evened out a little or whether they just went off the deep end in that area.
Well, and in the worst case, we know that he became more flexible because when he was a child, he would only eat Klingon food. We learned that in this episode, and now he drinks prune juice, and he is adapting himself a little bit to this Starfleet culture. Um, I don't know. It is an interesting. It's just Star Trek does such a good job of pushing little buttons like that and making you think.
And I think this was a good growth episode for pretty much all the main characters that
Yeah,
we're focused on.
yeah,
Picard probably grew more than everyone else, but Wesley evolved a little bit after having had some kind of contact with his father, and certainly Worf, I think, came to appreciate his parents maybe in just a little different way.
and you have to really hand it to the production team for after those two intense episodes, taking an entire episode to let the characters deal with what they've been through. I mean, in hindsight, it would have been very strange if the next week Picard puts on his uniform and they go off to the next adventure of the week. Taking a week or an episode to let you see him, break down and confront what he's got inside of him, and now he's got that inside him, even if you're not going to see it. If he's going to keep it buried, that he's carrying some pain in him over what happened.
I'm so glad you said that, because I was thinking something along those lines, although not exactly that. But just the idea that, again, we've had 2 episodes and a season break with all that tension. And how do you recapture, the tension for the next story? Well, you're right. They didn't even try.
Yeah,
They just let everybody kind of recover and evolve a little bit. And it was a lot easier then to move on to the next episode, because you
yeah,
felt like there was a different kind of conclusion, and it was really needed for the evolution of the characters.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I really enjoyed it. If you're watching this and you haven't watched Family in a long time, go download it. It's just so good.
And you know what, David? I think I would tell folks to watch the 2 episodes before, so they
Yeah,
get that whole experience. I mean, that'll be a
yeah,
little more investment in time,
yeah,
but because you have to get that sense of tension to appreciate this sense of letdown and peacefulness, if you will, or
yeah.
recovery. I'm not
It's
sure.
so wound up. I remember between that was a season finale and then the season premiere, and I was at the Hollywood Bowl, and and Patrick Stewart was there for something, and I literally walked right past him. And I remember thinking, man, I just want to know what's going to happen. So it was during the off season between the two. I see celebrities once in a while around LA, and I don't think I've ever talked to one, but that was one of the times I've been most tempted to just say, tell me it's going to be okay.
The other thing too, this episode I think lays a little bit of groundwork for a lot of things that happen later and are about to happen, because we in the season, pardon me, in the series finale of Star Trek, we see an older Picard in the vineyards, and now with the new Picard series coming out, at least for the poster and all, you see Picard in the vineyards. There seems to be an implication that those vineyards may not be on Earth, but you're not quite sure.
Oh, really? Yeah, I was wondering when they show the wide shot of the house that they're going to go back to that house for this new series.
Yeah, I mean, there are just so many things, but apparently winemaking and grapes and all that are very much just in the Picard blood, if you will.
Yeah,
it's something that's alien to me, but I guess maybe it makes a lot of sense to those who are in that particular culture.
Are you ready to watch the new series?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't know, when does that start?
I think it starts the first part of 2020. I think I've got that right.
I don't know that I'm going to necessarily subscribe to their streaming service for one show. I may wait until it's run a while and then come in. But Picard is probably one of my favorite, if not, I guess he is my favorite Star Trek character, and so I am going to watch that at some point.
I'm looking forward to it, and I was a little bit hesitant until I saw the trailers. Not that I'm not hesitant and that was or was not going to watch it, but hesitant about how they were going to treat the character and how they were going to make it interesting, since now Picard has left Starfleet. Yeah. And from what we've seen from the trailers and all, it looks like it's going to be, there's going to be some action, but it's going to be taking Picard in a whole different direction, not being in command of a starship. And I think it's going to be exciting.
As I understand it, Patrick Stewart has some a production credit on the show, and he took an active role in kind of outlining where the character goes. They respected him as the character to take his opinion as to where the character should go. So I think he was actually pretty involved. I'm sorry, the term was, he has a producer credit. I think he was quite involved with that storyline, which is just the opposite of what Lucas did with Mark Hamill in The Last Jedi. And I'm disappointed in the way Luke Skywalker was treated in The Last Jedi, and I think Mark Hamill was too, and they kind of ignored him. So it seems to me like the Star Trek people are doing a better job of understanding these heritage characters than the Star Wars people do.
I think it's got to be interesting. And of course, Star Wars, no letters, folks. This is just a discussion here. Star Wars were a series of movies. Star Trek was a TV series. And I've heard in other TV series how the actors will go to the writers and say, hey, I think this is how my character would react. And it's something that, as a non-actor, I don't always understand or appreciate, but the idea that they become that character in some ways and start to think like that character, or at least what they think that character would think like, as opposed to the way that the writers interpret the character.
Yeah, yeah.
And so,
well, I think that Patrick Stewart has always been very invested in Captain Picard, and that's the reason why I think so many of us love it so much.
David, from watching some of Patrick Stewart's other work, I think he's invested in anything he does. I just think that's his nature. Yeah. I think it would be inconceivable for him to just try to phone it in.
That was my biggest frustration with the Harry Potter series, is how did you make 7 movies with so many British actors and not get Patrick Stewart in one of the roles? I feel like us Star Trek fans have been robbed by Harry Potter. We needed Patrick Stewart in there somewhere. Too late to do anything about it, but
never thought about that. I always thought he was an interesting choice in the X-Men series.
yeah,
And again, that's another reason I think I just don't see Patrick Stewart ever phoning it in. He
yeah,
does such an amazing job with every role I've ever seen him in.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, even Ebenezer Scrooge, I think is he does a phenomenal job. So
Well,
he's just an outstanding actor.
for what it's worth, I've thought it through, and I'm thinking Patrick Stewart should have been Mad Eye Moody in Harry Potter. That's all I'm saying.
Not being a Harry Potter person, I can't comment on
Well,
that, so I'll just let it go.
And I think I'm dragging your audience into Star Wars and Harry Potter. So
Hey, that's all right. We're all friends here. We're all friends here. This show just happens to focus on Star Trek.
Yeah.
Where would Picard fit in the Star Wars universe?
I don't know. I think he would be a kind of a rough around the edges guy. So he could fit on either side of it. He could be a formal, like imperial, general kind of guy. But I could also see him as a gritty rebel. So I don't know. He's a good actor. He could do either side of it. Oh, he'd also be good as like an older Jedi, like a Jedi that's been in hiding, and he comes out and he's just scraggly looking, but just a complete bad what once he pulls out his lightsaber.
I think I agree with that last one. I think that sounds like the right role. So
his robes would be a little rough around the edges. He's probably been living, pretty hard for a long time. But when the time comes, he shows up.
Well, get George Lucas on the phone and see what you can do.
Yeah, George Lucas doesn't get to pick anymore.
Well, whoever the showrunners are on that, or the movie runners.
It depends which week you ask, from what I hear.
Yeah.
But the family, man, it was a great episode. I'm so glad that you reached out to me and gave me an excuse to watch this again. I'm going to go back. There's several episodes I want to watch again. I forget what was the name of the other one that I had suggested that you said, oh no, everybody wants to do that episode. One
Inner
where
Light.
the time what?
Inner Light.
Yeah, with the flute.
Yep.
That's another one.
Yep.
As a dad, that's the one that gets to all the dads, right? But I'm really glad I picked this one.
Well, I am too. David, there's been such a great run of this show, finding out some things about some of my friends that I might not have known if we hadn't done these shows. Star Trek always seems to come up over on Mac Voices, before, during, or after the show. And so the fact that now I have a chance to really dig into some of your psyches and figure out what's going on in there, it's pretty cool. It's a little scary, but it's pretty cool. So when you're not
watching, have you ever shared your favorite episode? Can I ask you? Can I turn the tables on you?
Oh, David, you know what? I can't say that I have a favorite. I honestly mean that. I'm not a good favorite picker. I have favorite episodes. And as folks who have been watching this show from the beginning know, I mean, some of the guests have picked episodes that I would have passed on. I would have put in my lower tier. By far. And after they finish explaining why it's special to them, I have to rethink it. So I'm fast approaching the conclusion, even more so than I've said in the past, that there is no bad Star Trek, because each episode seems to be, it's either somebody's favorite or it means something deep and important to each person. And I love that. I love that. So
the other thing I noticed, because I really hadn't gone back to watch Next Generation in a long time, is I feel like the production values really hold up. I mean, it's been a long time since that show was on the air. It looks a little dated, but it doesn't look that bad.
No, I agree. I mean, the original series gets a lot of, a lot, but that was produced in the 60s, and it was produced with the 60s technology and the 60s sensibilities, and
a shoestring budget. Yeah.
And, Roddenberry had to sell it to the network executives. So at some point, I mean, think back to the other science fiction or genre series of the day,
Yeah.
and they're at least as bad, if not worse, and
Yeah.
certainly, barely hold up, if at all. But Star
Yeah.
Trek continues to roll on. So
Yeah. But the Next Generation, I mean, I know they put serious money into it, but it still looks good. I mean, it's not like jarring. Like when I watched the original series, it's the cardboard sets are so jarring sometimes it takes you out of the story. And then the Next Generation, I never really felt that.
yeah, have you watched Discovery at all?
Yeah. Yeah. I bought the first season. And then when the second season came out, I subscribed for a few months at the end of the run and watched it all in like a weekend. And I think it's great. I mean, I
Yeah.
think they're doing a great job. I don't know. I'm not really plugged into the Star Trek community like I am the Star Wars community. I know where like the fan feelings are about different things. But I thought they did a really good job of modernizing, but still keeping the essence of Star Trek. And again, the acting was amazing, and just like in the Next Generation, Q always delighted me whenever he came on. I know some people weren't big Q fans, but it's just like let's put an all powerful character in just to screw with people once in a while. So I thought that was kind of fun. And then I feel the same way about Michelle Yeoh. She was this amazing captain, and then she turned into this like counter villain kind of person, and she like steals every scene she's in with her lines. And I don't know, I think I'm not that critical of media anyway when it's something I want to enjoy, but I think the new Star Trek stuff is really good.
Well, I ask you that question mainly because at the end of Discovery, and folks, if you haven't seen Discovery yet and you don't want spoiler, then shut this episode down or skip ahead a few minutes.
Bye.
Yeah, yeah, little time warp here, but
Okay.
I thought they did such an amazing job with modernizing the bridge of the Enterprise. At
Yeah.
the end, in Discovery,
Yeah.
modernizing the ship itself at the very end of season 1, but definitely
Yeah.
modernizing the bridge so
Yeah.
that it's our bridge. I mean, it's
Yeah. Close
NCC
enough.
1701, but
Yeah.
it looks really, really good. And so
Yeah.
I hope we get to see more of that because
Yeah.
it felt like coming home again.
I feel like they built it, so they're going to use it.
I hope you're right. I
Yeah.
really hope you're right.
Yeah.
So, David, when you're not watching Star Wars or Star Trek or Harry Potter or the MCU or whatever else you watch, where can
Yeah.
folks catch up with you?
Yeah, I'm over at maxparky.com where I write about technology and Apple stuff in general. I sell a bunch of online courses at learn.maxparky.com, and then I podcast over on the Relay Network, Mac Power Users, the Focused podcast, which is kind of about staying focused, and the Automators, which is about bringing automation in your life and getting your work done a little faster. So, but if you go to maxparky.com, there's links for all of that stuff.
I don't know how you keep up with it all, but I hope you continue to do it because it's a lot of great stuff.
Well, I don't honestly. It's like I said, this is the fandom that I chose, so I keep up with that. But I'm just not that up on Star Trek. It's been too long since I went back and watched The Next Generation. You've definitely inspired me, though. I'm going to make some time to go watch some more. And I have in my head a list of 10 or 12 episodes I really want to see again, so I'm going to make sure to do that.
Great. Well, I hope you'll come back, pick one of those 10 or 12 after you watch them and do it again.
All right. Will do.
Sounds good. David, thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate the time.
Thanks, Chuck.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is Trek Favorites. Thank you for joining us. We'd love to hear what you thought about Family or any other Star Trek episodes. You can obviously visit us on our Facebook page. You can see the video version of this on YouTube if you're listening to the audio version. And I embed the video on the website as well, TrekFavorites.com. Until the next time, thanks for joining us. Visit TrekFavorites.com to access all our shows, watch the video versions on our YouTube channel, and connect with us on Twitter and Facebook as @TrekFavorites.